Hi everybody! So by request, I'm going to show you guys how I made these little frames, and they look like this. These are the Regal framed fonts from Tattered Angels. So what you're going to need is some black acrylic paint, a flat 1-inch brush. Let me grab mine, it's in my water bucket here. So I'm going to load up my brush first. I've got some black paint on there. And then I'm kind of going to wipe it off. This one is a little wet yet, so I'm going to try to dry it off a little bit on my paper here, and then I'm going to dip it back into the paint. And so I'm loading up my brush. I'm making sure that paint is all nice on my bristles and nothing's real chunky on my brush there. And then, let me move this paper over a little bit. I'm going to grab my font, my framed font. And this part is really, really important. You're not going to be doing this. You're going to be dragging it sideways onto your chip. So you want the sides of your paintbrush to drag onto the chip like that. See, this one is way too wet, so it's not really working all that well. So I'm going to go really light, but you can see as I get rid of some of that moisture, it's only catching the high points. That's what you want. So I'm going to kind of try to dry my brush off a little bit, and I'll grab another one for you. I just grabbed this brush out of the water jar, so. Okay, so really quick again, you're going to drag the sides of your brush onto your framed font, just so it's catching the embossed image, the high points of your glimmer chip. Brooke, stop. It was your brother doing that yesterday, now it's you. Okay, so something like that. So you're not going like that. If you go like that, it's just going to paint the whole thing and it's not going to catch the high points because this is a really light embossing on here. It's not real deep. Alright, and then if you want, you can make little streaks in there to kind of look like wood grain. Alright, so we're going to dry that up. Set my brush to the side here. I'm going to show you 2 different ways to do this. Make sure it's completely dry. So I'm making sure I'm drying it really well. Alright, and that's pretty good. And now I'm going to grab my foam blending tool. I'm going to grab my foam that I used for my StazOn inks. I'll tell you why I keep those separate in a minute. Now I'm going to use Saddle Brown StazOn. Looks like this. Love this. It's my favorite ink. I use it all the time. And now I'm just going to dab the brown ink. You don't want to rub, you just want to dab onto my glimmer chip here. And it will look really light at first, but we're going to do several coats, so it'll get darker and darker as you go. Alright, so I want to leave some light points because I want it to look like wood, but I'm going to make most of it dark. So I'm going back in, and it's getting darker and darker as I go over it with more ink. But I'm leaving some areas lighter, so it looks a little blotchy. And that's how I'm going to get that faux wood effect. Alright, so you can see how some areas are light and some areas are dark. Well, you can leave it just like this, and it's fine, but I want it to be a little glossy. So, I'm going to grab some Mod Podge and another paintbrush. So we're going to dip our paintbrush into the Mod Podge. Get a good amount on your brush. And you're going to just coat it right over. This is why you want to use the Mod Podge, is to get that glossy look. I'm going to grab a little bit more. Get a nice, good coat. You could also use Claudine Helmuth Glossy Multimedium. That's what I would normally use, but I'm all out of it. I only have the matte, and so I'm using this. They both work very well though. Alright, so now we're going to rinse our brush and we're going to dry this up. Now when you're using the heat tool to dry this, make sure you're not getting too close. You don't want the Mod Podge to boil up and bubble. So I just sort of spread even heat around the whole thing, and I'm not staying in one place for too long. And there's going to be some chunkier parts of the Mod Podge that take longer to dry. Just set it aside and let it dry on its own. And now I'll show you what it looks like. So see how you've got that nice wood looking image. So I'm going to show you another way to do this to get this kind of effect. So what you're going to use for this one is some dark brown StazOn. I'm using Timber Brown. And your glimmer chip. And I just take it and I rub my pad over it just like this. And this pad's almost is starting to dry out. But I keep it because I love the effect that it gives when it's almost dried out. So you're going to drag it right over the top. I'm pressing quite hard. If you have a new pad, you're not going to have to press hard. You're going to need a permanent pad, so use your StazOn pads for this. Or your archival pads, either way. And then now, I'm not going to use the saddle brown, because if I go over this with a saddle brown, it's kind of like that roll they have for permanent ink. Permanent ink removes permanent ink. So basically, if I take this and I drag it over it, the two colors are just going to mush together because this ink is going to reactivate this ink. So I'm not using this. I'm going to use some Brush Corduroy Distressed ink. And this is my StazOn blending pad that I've got on here. So I'm going to take that off because I don't want to smudge colors. And now I'm going to use my water-based Distressed ink pad. So I'm going to dab it in there just like I did the first time. This time you're going to kind of rub it in. Because you're using two different inks and one is permanent, you don't need to worry about them smudging together. Okay, hang on. So, and then you could dab a little bit and get some darker spots in there. Or if you need to get this one's got a little bit heavier of an embossing, so it takes a little elbow grease to get it into the little grooves. But it works pretty good. So now you've got something that looks like this. It's much more subtle of a look. It's not as contrast as the other ones. And now I'm going to take the Mod Podge, and I already had Mod Podge on my brush, and I just dipped the brush a little bit in water. So I'm basically watering down the Mod Podge just a little bit. And we're just going to do a thin brush over our framed font here. And this is still going to dry a little glossy, but it's much more subtle than the really, really glossy finish I showed you on the last one. And the way I inked these looks a lot different too. This is more aged looking instead of like a faux wood look. Alright, so I've done that, and then now I'm going to dry it up. Alright, so now you'll see you've just barely got a sheen on there. It's not super, super shiny, and it's not matte, but it gives it a nice, like, sealed look, so it doesn't really look like paper anymore. So there's that one. So there's the difference in the two. Pretty neat, huh? Anyway, I hope you guys liked it, and have a great night.